думаем на тему о том,
We are thinking that if someone believes it is possible to supply such weapons to a war zone in order to strike our territory and create problems for us, then why do we not have the right to supply our weapons of the same class to those regions of the world where there will be strikes on the sensitive facilities of those countries that are doing this against Russia? So the response could be asymmetric. We will think about this. And of course, such actions will finally destroy international relations and undermine international security. Ultimately, if we see those countries being drawn into a war against us, and this is their direct participation in a war against Russia, then we reserve the right to act in the same way. All in all, this is a path to very serious problems.
Well, a marathon 3-hour interview on the sidelines of the St. Petersburg Economic Forum in which a variety of topics were raised. But of course, the conversation was dominated by the war in Ukraine. Not just its causes, namely the Western-backed coup in 2014, not just the narratives being spun about an expansionist Moscow, but also about the realities on the ground today. Now, one reality which Vladimir Putin is, as we just heard, very clear-eyed about is that Western-supplied long-range missiles will almost inevitably be used by Kiev to strike Russian territory. Now, we know that this is something that has been endlessly debated in recent weeks by the media and politicians alike in Europe and in America. But it now seems fairly obvious that despite initial reservations about their weaponry being used to strike cities like Moscow, where I'm standing now, or St. Petersburg, the West has given the green light, untying Kiev's hands in this regard. A risky and dangerous move which will probably only open the floodgates for further escalation. As for the fear-mongering which Western capitals are engaging in, here's President Putin's reaction to that.
There is no need to invent anything and use these ideas to form an opinion about Russia. Forming an enemy image out of Russia is not necessary. You're only harming yourself by doing so. You made up that Russia wants to attack NATO. Are you completely crazy? Dance like this stable? Who came up with this? It's nonsense, you know. That's rubbish. It would be nonsense if there was no plan to fool their own population. Oh, help! Russia will attack us soon. We must urgently arm ourselves, urgently send weapons to Ukraine. But in fact, why is it being done? To maintain their own imperial position of greatness.
The question of the Ukrainian leader's legitimacy was also raised. Now, you probably remember that Zelensky cancelled the presidential elections, which should have taken place this year, citing wartime martial law. But his critics say that since his term officially ended in late May, he is now unconstitutionally running the country. But what's interesting is that despite this, despite the death toll of Ukraine's armed forces rising daily, despite the situation for Kiev on the front worsening daily, and despite Zelensky's popularity plummeting in recent times from 90% to around 65%, the White House continues to back Zelensky to the hilt. Why? Here's Vladimir Putin's take on that.
If we're talking about irretrievable losses in particular, then the ratio is the same, 1 to about 5. That's the basis on which we're operating. This, by the way, is the reason for the attempt to carry out total mobilization in Ukraine, because there are very large losses on the battlefield. We know from the Ukrainian side, and this is an open secret, that the US administration is insisting that the threshold be gradually lowered from 25 to 23, then to 20 years, and then to 18, or immediately to 18. Because now they already require registration of 17-year-old boys. We know this for sure. This is a demand from the US administration to the Ukrainian leadership, which can hardly be considered the leadership after elections were cancelled. In any case, I think that the US administration will force the current leadership of Ukraine to make these decisions, to lower the mobilization age to 18 years, and then they will simply get rid of Zelensky. Now it's June 2024. It seems to me that it will take a year to do all this. Until the beginning of next year, at least they will tolerate him. And when he does everything, they will say goodbye and change him. There are several candidates, as far as I understand.
And this really all feeds into the wider issue of not just Zelensky, but Ukraine as a whole being little more than a pawn for the West, cynically abused by Washington, especially in the name of great power politics.
After all, no one in the US is interested in Ukraine. They are interested in the greatness of the United States, which is fighting not for Ukraine and not for the Ukrainian people, but for its greatness and for its leadership in the world. And in no case do they want to allow any kind of success for Russia, precisely because they believe that in this case, the leadership of the US would be damaged. That's the gist of what America is doing.
So those were some of the key takeaways from that pretty comprehensive interview, and definitely an overriding sense that President Putin is under no illusion as to whom Russia is really fighting and how far the West is willing to go to cling on to the global dominance that it has enjoyed uninterrupted for centuries.